Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept of human rights, citizen rights, universal rights, the practical application of rights, and what we're seeing today is boutique rights. When I say boutique, I mean that the transgender, black, lesbian can say, well, I've got more social victimhood than anyone else. And because of that social victimhood, I not only have more rights than anyone else, but my rights trump everyone else's rights. So your rights are secondary to mine. So rights cease to be universal. Now, once rights are boutique extended to this or that group based on an ideological construct of social victimhood, then really there's no rights at all. There's arbitrary rights that are extended by the state rather than rights being universal. For example, a universal right should be that everyone is treated equally under the law. Now, there'll be exceptions, the super rich or something like that, but that everyone's treated equally under the law. If we're going to have a cohesive society with high levels of social trust, that needs to be applied not only rigorously and evenly, but defended by the state. The idea that a person A, be they a transgender such and such, or a such and such, or a straight white male, or this or that, or whatever they may appear in some ideological victimhood type fantasy universe, wherever they may appear on that, they should still be treated equally under the law, and laws apply equally to them, not only as in the application of the law, who gets arrested or this sort of thing, but also in due legal process. The interrogation of A should be just as rigorous as the interrogation of B, or as soft and gentle, depending on how you look at it. But that's not how it is today. Ideological, Marxist contrived social victimhood is, and I don't believe the globalists believe this for a minute, but they use it as the basis for destroying and undermining social cohesion and destroying and undermining and demoralizing the very fabric of Western society. Now, again, having done a vast amount of business travel around the world, the West was the only place that had, on a relative basis, it wasn't perfect, but the only place that had this application of the law, this equal application of the law, the due legal process, the independent courts, and a whole host of other things, recognition of contract law and so on, that held everyone to the same standard and held everyone to account. Now, the clarity of rules are important because then everyone knows what to do if they want to avoid trouble, if they want to achieve positive outcomes. These are the rules, and this is how you work and operate, and how you interact with one another, and how you define each other's obligations, responsibilities, and so on. These could be obligations under a business contract or obligations as a citizen to the state and to your fellow citizens. So this was something that the West had far more advanced thing than the situation in any other place. And where they did not have this, or had it hardly at all, it was a poor, desperate, fucked up basket case of a country. Not that they didn't have their rich elite that were exploiting the peasants, but they were very poor, very dysfunctional, and going nowhere. A failed state, or always on that cusp of about to become a failed state. Now that separated the West. Now where the globalists are in a situation now where they're dismantling that advantage the West had and the clear rules and so on. So it's hard to tell now, if somebody does a tweet or an email or some social media thing or something like that that maybe misgenders somebody, then that's considered as a hate crime, and they can have the police knocking on their door. But if property gets destroyed or whatever, that's no longer a crime, or is considered to be who cares type crime. Whereas social victimhood crimes trespass upon the rights of the social victim, as in the construct of victimhood, and therefore that is a crime because the law will be rigorously applied there, but not in another case. So that means the equal application of the law has already ceased to exist. It no longer exists. me as a straight white male, I have fewer rights than the transgender, lesbian, black person. So I have fewer victimhood points, so therefore my rights are less, and that many things I can do in theory, or any straight white male can trespass upon the rights of someone who has greater levels of victimhood, social victimhood. So it's a difficult thing to navigate through, and the people who are applying the law don't seem to have much more understanding of the ramifications and the practical aspects of it than someone who just accidentally bumps into it, inadvertently breaks what is an ideological law based on a social fantasy than it is an absolute outright breaking of a clearly codified law. So, which is the case now in the West, again with things like transgender and feminist this and racism that and misogyny such and such, where laws are not clearly codified that apply equally to all, then the ability for the state, an ideologically driven state that's determined to demoralize a population, there's so many opportunities for mischief that it's just out of control, which it currently is. So when we have boutique rights as we have now, then that effectively cancels out, at least in my view, cancels out everyone's rights, because rights cease to be universal or universally applied. Whether someone is a black transgender lesbian and they commit a crime that could be theft or anything, it doesn't matter. I mean, a crime, then the law should apply equally to them as the straight white male. But there are different levels of it now, and activist courts are holding straight white males, for example, or white people, particularly straight white males, to a much higher standard of responsibility and accountability than they are the people who are supposed to be in a situation of social victimhood. So this is clearly affecting due legal process, because the burden of evidence and proof that it's on the straight white male is much higher than it is on the black transgender lesbian. So this difference in due legal process and application of law, of course, is undermining the very social cohesion of the West, and of course is undermining its institutions all at the same time, while simultaneously purporting to be, we're only protecting the weak. That's all we're doing. We're doing something good. We're protecting transgenders from those evil fucking fascist fucking Nazi. So we're doing good things. So we're allowed to do this because we're doing something good. Our moral purpose is such that we're good and they're bad, and so on. But this may sound like, well, this is okay, but it's not, because again, it undermines the law or the equal application of the law and due legal process, and of course the institutions that I mentioned a moment ago. Therefore, it's undermining, destroying, and crushing, and deconstructing, and all that sort of stuff, without replacing it with anything that's more better or even as good or anything. It's purely destructive, and that needs to be seen for what it is. So let's come back to the universal rights. Now, that everyone is treated equally under the law is a universal right. So we're in a situation now where rights are ceasing to be universal, and they've become boutique, and they've been hopelessly intertwined with insane, fucked up ideology. I want to now come to the idea of rights being our rights universal, and as some people say, the US Constitution sort of infers this, is that there are natural rights that people have, and that these rights are bestowed from, what does the Constitution suggest, bestowed from God. So God gives these rights, and these are natural rights. These are not extended by government and cannot be taken away by government. So once you have the natural rights, you then have rights of, for example, contract law, business contract or something like that, or an employment contract, it could be. that then becomes a subset or a micro agreement or a set of micro laws which become rights. You know, it is the right of the employee to get paid every week. It is the right of the employer to expect the employee to come to work every day and work this amount of hours. So you can't call those universal rights because they would apply to a situation of employment that may be unique to that. You can have a basic thing of the employee has to turn up, the employer has to pay them. But once you get sort of to the details beyond that, then it becomes not a universal right, but a specific law that pertains to that. Now, rights can come through a series of things. For example, you have the right when you get arrested to be told what the crime is, what the evidence is against you, and so on. You have to be clearly said you have broken this law, and this is what you've done to break it, and we have reason to believe. Now, that doesn't mean that you've done it or you're guilty. It means that the police in this case would arrest a citizen or arrest somebody. The Department of Prosecutions would have to agree to say, yep, this case looks pretty good. Let's take it to court. And and appoint a lawyer, and that sort of prosecuting lawyer, and then it would be incumbent on the state, and that the accused is innocent until the state can prove them guilty in an independent court of law based on the evidence, where the evidence is given equal weight from both sides, and where the law applies equally to all sides. So that's a right that can be universal and universally applied, even when you get into the weeds of the details. We're also, losing that, if not already lost it. Now, once the number of micro laws, and we can call them micro rights, reaches a certain point, then the discretionary, arbitrary power of the state and the elites becomes minimized. At that point, the elites say, well, hey, hold on a minute. Why should we share power with these fucking peasants? We're the ones actually in control. We let you have these rights. We allow you to have these rights. And we're in control, and we can take them away anytime the fuck we want to. Now, that's really the situations that occurred after 1990. And when the Soviet Union fell, and the communist sort of bloc fell, there was no powerful state sponsor sponsoring that alternative government where the ruling classes would be, taken out back and shot. Everything would be socialized. The rich wouldn't own anything. They'd be reduced to being gardeners in some commune farm, and that wasn't a pleasant thought. And so a lot of the rights that the Western citizens had were really the micro rights of extra sort of legal protections in employment and from arbitrary arrest and all sorts of things like that were a reflection of a defensive attitude that the elites were taking to mollifying the citizenry so that communism was not an attractive alternative. At least not communism directed by the Soviets or the revolutionaries. When revolutionaries take over, it's a different sort of person that's in control than if the elites impose communism, which is pretty much what they're doing now, imposing sort of socialism on the masses and keeping private ownership and vast wealth to themselves. But this idea of rights ebb and flow, once the elites decided that they didn't have to mollify the Western masses anymore, the attitude then came along of, well, why the fuck should we share power? These people aren't even the shit on our shoes. We let them have this power. So the idea of universal rights took backstage. Now, people that were present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th can be arbitrarily arrested, even though they've committed no crime. They can be arbitrarily detained, a flagrant violation of the writ of habeas corpus, but they're still in prison now. Now, that couldn't happen if law was applied equally to everybody and due legal process existed. So clearly it's not there. I mean, that's but one example. I could go to many, but that's one example. So the way to create conflict in society is to extend special, boutique, unique rights to one group, the transgender black lesbian, and then force a situation, artificially force a situation of conflict with others, that then destabilizes and demoralizes and undermines society and makes the law just one huge sort of exercise in dysfunction, which then allows the state to act arbitrarily, ideologically, politically arbitrarily as it sees fit. For example, the January 6th issue of arbitrarily arresting people who committed no crime, where no crime has been proved. So this is where rights ebb and flow. And if you look at, say, the Roman Empire, as the Roman Empire or the Western Roman Empire sort of reached its immediately before its demise and its sort of decline and being invaded and all this sort of thing, the rights of the citizens had in technical sense never been greater. Like everyone had these special boutique rights that were, but the universal rights that Roman citizens had once enjoyed, but which made everyone responsible and gave the citizens had obligations and responsibilities as the state did to the citizen and vice versa. Those universal rights applying equally to all, that was taken away. That all these boutique little laws and boutique little rights took that away to the point where it became a huge dysfunction. No one believed in the system anymore. And I think we're in that situation in the West now. And it needs to be opposed, I believe, by people who are concerned, and many should be concerned, that rights, returning to a situation where rights are universally applied and not extending boutique rights again to the proverbial sort of black, lesbian, transgender, then rights can be, once rights are universally applied. The black, transgender, lesbian, by the way, and whatever we may or may not think about such a lifestyle, is equally entitled to the same protections under the law as anyone else. And so if they're arrested for whatever it is they're arrested for, they're entitled to the whatever law applies to the other person applies to them also, and applies equally to them. And if they're taken into court, whatever the allegations the state has against them, alleged crime, they're entitled to the same due legal process as anyone else, and the same assumption of innocence. Now that's gone now, or effectively gone, in practical reality gone, and that's a huge destructive influence on the West. So I believe rights, whether they be universal rights, micro rights, subset rights, or simply laws that provide protections under different circumstances, such as employment law, things like that, these things are all now in a state of flux, and we don't know where they're going to land again. And there's no Western, because they're all globalist controlled now, there's no Western body politic that I can see that is prepared to come to grips with this and to reinstitute universal rights and restore the sanctity of not only application of law but due legal process to our institutions. And it must happen, and must happen soon. And if it doesn't, and I can't see it happening, by the way, the West is the Western world is on a short route to disaster, and that's not a good thing. You've been with Tacitus today. Your pushback challenge. Thank you for listening.